Welcome to today's show. I am your host, Eric Darnley Small. And as you guys know, when you come to this show, I am going to have clips. I'm going to talk about stories. I'm going to talk about things that I find interesting. And if you like what you see here, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel and clicking that bell so that you can be notified of new content. In addition, I'm going to read from stories here, and I encourage you to go and take a look at the full story yourself so that you can make up your own minds as to what the article really says and means. And you can reach out to the show at our Mastodon, mastodon.vtip.me/@ what you missed, and give me your opinion or reach out to the show. Let me know how I'm doing, etc., etc. On today's show, I want to continue focusing on what I think is a fascinating thing happening on the right. It's already been a massive number of days. As expected, Donald Trump's, all of his nominees are getting through, even though they're pretty horrible, is the only way that I can think of it. And not at all qualified to do the job that they're being hired to do. And I think it's to be expected. No one should be surprised by this. And if you are surprised, you haven't been paying attention. But one of the things that I am really looking at is what's happening on the right and how much they're willing to take of what's going on. And I said in previous videos I was going to take some time before people really begin to feel what's going on, particularly with respect to tariffs and everything. And he's been playing footsie with the tariffs, which is typical. He doesn't know what he's doing, Donald Trump. And he's making enemies wherever he goes, which is also typical of an autocrat who really doesn't know what they're doing. But one of the things is very interesting, and that is this notion of Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism is best, I think, described as the Christian version of what we see in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Egypt. I mean, just go through the whole gambit. It is basically a country that is all of its laws and all of its justice system is completely based on interpretations of the Quran. That's what happens in the Middle East. Here in America, it's the same thing, but it will be based on the Christian Bible. So the idea of a freedom of religion is gone. But one of the things that's interesting about Christian nationalism, and Christian nationalism are ascendant right now, right? We know Pete Hegseth is a Christian nationalist. We know this guy at OMB, Russell Vought. He's now at CFPB. Russell Vought is a Christian nationalist, as I mentioned on my last show. There's a lot of Christian nationalists, even on the Supreme Court, Christian nationalists. They're everywhere within the Republican Party. But the one major difference between Christian nationalists and the movement, the MAGA movement, or what I like to call the conservative 2.0 movement in the Republican Party, is they put their lot behind Donald Trump. And unlike in the Middle East, where you would have a mullah who has the supreme power, or the supreme leader, like in Iran, who would have the real power, and the president is kind of just a figurehead, you at least know that they've read the Quran, right? Everyone from the supreme leader throughout the government has at least read the Quran. Here, Donald Trump has never read the Bible. Not only has he never read the Bible, he doesn't believe in the Bible. This is a man who said, I've never had to pray for forgiveness. I just try to do better. That's his view of Christianity, which to me is going to be untenable with the Christian right, or it's going to cause a schism between the Christian right and the evangelical or right-wing Christians. And we're already beginning to see some signs of that. Because the Christian right in America, the evangelical right in America, put their lot behind Donald Trump because they were told from their leadership that that's what they should do. That this man is basically the second coming, and that he would bring about, whatever they're promised by by who they believe God is or Jesus is or whatnot. And he was doing things. He catered to them. I mean, you had religious leaders there putting hands on him and saying he was protected by God and whatnot, which is Christian nationalists. Very different from the Christian right we're beginning to see. They used to be one, but I think we're beginning to see them split off because the Christian nationalists are bending their will to Trump. They believe he is the second coming. that they don't need to know anything about the Bible or any of that kind of stuff, or doing good works or any of that kind of stuff. And David French, who is, I think, well known in Christian areas as a commentator and a speaker and whatnot, writer, did an op-ed the other day, which I read and found absolutely interesting. And I wasn't the only one to read it. Apparently, Ed Kilgore of the Intelligencer did a write-up. This was yesterday on the 13th of February. And it's an op-ed in the New York Times. And French goes after these cuts. And it says, one of their staunchest warriors, this is Ed Kilgore saying this in the Intelligencer, one of the staunchest warriors, longtime religious liberty litigator, David French, now an op-ed columnist at the New York Times, has fired back not only at the administration, but at fellow evangelicals who cheer it on. And he quotes French saying, there are few things more symbolic of the decline of the Republican Party than its radical turn against humanitarian aid. And it's not just a turn within the Republican Party, it's a turn within evangelical church. It took a generation of legal and political arguments, often from Christian conservatives, before the federal government began supporting Christian organizations, and now this entire edifice of humanitarian aid threatens to come crashing down. I understand the desire of many Americans not to fund ideological projects that run counter to their values, but Christians are turning on the programs and groups that they helped create. That won't solve our budget crisis. It won't end the culture war. It will, however, harm people Scripture commands us to care for. And there's nothing woke about medicine or food. Now, how long is it going to take for the religious right to start going after French as being a puppet of the left and a wokeism and DEIism? It goes on. Again, Kilgore saying, continued efforts to divide Christians between sheep who follow Trump and goats who follow the Good Shepherd may cast a renewed spotlight on exactly how godly this administration really is. Conservative evangelical Russell Moore, who split with his own Southern Baptist denomination over its subordination to Trump's political agenda, writing about some of the same concerns expressed by French, draws attention to the worldview of Musk and much of the federal government. And he says, quote, several years ago, Elon Musk told Axios journalists Mike Allen and Jim Vandehei that human beings must merge with machines to overcome their existential threat of artificial intelligence. When pressed about what this means for our sense of reality, Musk said that we should question whether reality itself is real. We are most likely in a simulation. Jesus is not easily silenced. The universe is no simulation. It is created and held together not by an algorithm, but by a word. And this word is no abstraction to be decoded, but a person, one who, quote, became flesh and dwelt among us. A million different Babel lies in the ruins of history, and behind them a million different Nimrods, all of whom would storm the limits of mortality and of accountability to create simulations of themselves and of their rule. They are all gone and they cannot be rebooted. So this is an interesting thing that is going on between Russell Moore and David French. And I wonder, however, how many others who listen to them or who know them that are beginning to realize that, you know what, this Christian right, Christian nationalism may not be all that it's cracked up to be. We already know that young people are moving further and further away from Christianity. People are becoming more and more disenchanted with it. But another very interesting thing that I was looking at is the religious left, apparently in Texas, is fighting from the ground in Texas. This is from the Reform Texas, drawing attention to what matters. I've never heard of this magazine before, but it's interesting because it looks like it's focusing on what's going on the left in Texas, what people are trying to do. And it says, quote, this is by Jeff Rounder. In October 2023, Texas Rep. James Talcario delivered a sermon at his home church in St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church of Austin. The grandson of a Baptist preacher, Talcario knows preaching, and he did not mince words. I've been a member of this church since I was 2 years old, and now I'm seminary studying to become a minister myself, he said. My faith means more to me than anything. But if I'm being very honest, sometimes I hesitate telling someone I'm a Christian. There is a cancer on our religion. Until we confess the sin that is Christian nationalism and exorcise it from our churches, our religion can do a lot more damage than a six-pack of Lone Star. Christian nationalism is vaguely defined term that encompasses several different ideologies, such as Christian supremacy, belief in the divine right of a nation to act as it will, the cleansing of groups deemed antithetical to Christian ideas from the community, and belief that government should drive its authority from the church structures. Few people openly define themselves as Christian nationalists, but it's a core belief in the far-right political power structure in Texas. The religious left is comparatively thin. There are no billionaire founders equivalents to the Republican Party megadonors like Tim Dunn and Farris Wilks on the left, pushing Christian lessons of taking care of the poor or accepting migrants. The money and the subsequent political rewards is definitely in promoting Christian nationalism, not promoting it. But the opposition does exist. Annunciation House in the Rio Grande Valley is a Catholic charity dedicated to providing shelter and legal aid to migrants. For half a century, they have been unabashedly a Christian mission, deriving their lessons from the Gospel of Matthew. Currently, they're being targeted by Texas state officials who want to end their mission. A case currently before the Texas Supreme Court will decide if left-wing Christians have the same religious freedom as right-wing ones when it comes to exercising their beliefs. Annunciation House mission is directly oppositional to Christian nationalism, but it's still rooted firmly in the scripture. So a war is beginning on the within the left and the right, which has always been there. But it is particularly becoming very interesting that it's happening also within the right, and people are beginning to question as to what it is they're trying to accomplish. Also, by the way, no such conversation anymore on the right about abortion, as Donald Trump has backed away from that. So, as he has said, you got to win elections. Donald Trump has said that. Moving on. Another issue that is very interesting is what Donald Trump's policies are doing to his overall mission of supposedly helping the poor or helping his base. And we're beginning to see Republicans begin to sort of run away from what Donald Trump has been doing and his mission to cut, or Elon Musk's. And this is from the other day. This is New York. This is NBC News, and it is from Shahil Kapoor, February the 12th. And it says that Republicans on Capitol Hill are full of praise of Donald Trump's flurry of executive actions and attempts to slash some federal spending, selling it as a kind of disruption that Americans voted for last fall. That is, until the pain risks hitting home. From cuts to healthcare and agricultural funding to fears of new tariffs negatively impacting local industries and consumers, Republican lawmakers starting to push back against certain aspects of his plan. Katie Britt recently pushed back on the administration's funding reductions under the NIH. The University of Alabama and Birmingham is a major recipient of that money, which has helped make the state its largest employer. Susan Collins of Maine said the cap on indirect costs from NIH grants was poorly conceived and would impose arbitrary cuts in funding for vital research at our main institutions. Bill Cassidy warned that universities that lack big endowments would lose out the most due to NIH cost cuts. While the NIH funding reductions triggered a round of warnings, they were among several examples of Republicans growing queasy about some of the blunt steps that the administration is taking that they believe could lead to adverse consequences for their states. Among the top 20 states that take more money from the federal government than they send in tax payments, 13 are solidly red states that voted for Trump in the last three elections, according to analysis by the Rockefeller Institute of Government of the fiscal 2024 budget. Meanwhile, the top 5 states and 9 of the top 10 have sent more money to the Treasury Department than they received voted for Democrats in the last 3 presidential elections. Another imperative for Republicans in rural areas is to protect farmers who rely on federal government as a major customer. The U.S. Agency for International Development, which Trump and billionaire advisor Elon Musk have targeted for dismantling, administers Food for Peace program, under which the government buys and distributes Americans' crops to help fight hunger around the world. A coalition of Republicans in rural states and districts, including House Agricultural Committee Chair Glenn Thompson of Pennsylvania, introduced legislation this week to save the Food for Peace program by transferring it to the Department of Agriculture. Man whose office said the program has fed more than 4 billion people in more than 150 countries introduced a bill with Thompson and Reps Rick Crawford, Dan Newhouse, David Rouser, as well as Jerry Moran and John Hoeven. Trump's tariffs have also ruffled feathers among some of his otherwise solid allies. That includes Chuck Grassley, who protested when Trump threatened to levy tariffs on imports from Canada. Grassley, citing Biden inflation, noted that the high cost of fertilizer and asked for an exemption to protect Iowa farmers. So this was to be expected. Those people who are on the right, who support Trump, are going to ask for favors to prevent him, to create a carve out for their communities so that they don't get hit with tariffs. This is how he's going to gain their loyalty and gain favors. This is like people coming to the king asking for a loaf of bread. Moving on as well, this is something that is very interesting that has happened, that is beginning to happen in one of the states that went the most for Donald Trump, Alabama. This is from NJ.com. And it says Trump's moves causing utility rates to rocket in red states. This was yesterday. Hundreds of people in Alabama were recently notified that their energy bills will spike thanks to Donald Trump's recent executive order. Alabama went for Trump in 2024 by more than 30 points. And it says Donald Trump promised that as president, he would drastically lower America's energy bills, but hundreds of Alabama residents are receiving a $100 surcharge in their energy bills as a direct result of Trump's actions in the White House, wrote Jug Legum. Community Action Agency of Huntsville, Madison, and Limestone counties have notified us that the grant you received for $100 on January 23, 2025 is no longer valid due to President Trump's executive order to rescind the funding behind the grant. Trump started his second administration with a blitz of policy actions to reorient the U.S. government. His executive orders covered issues that range from trade, immigration, to U.S. foreign aid, to demographic diversity, civil rights, etc. So this is the beginning of the break within the administration and within the base. Steve Bannon on his show said a lot of people take Medicaid who are MAGA, and you got to be very careful who you're targeting with these MAGA. With these cuts to Medicaid. So that is a fascinating thing that I think is happening. 2 other quick things I want to get to. And I suppose I should probably start with what's going on the left, because there is some interesting stuff happening there. And there's an article that came out about California. Now, I have said before that I think that there is a good chance that some of the places that are considered staples of the Democratic base, like California and New York, could flip to the red. That, of course, is all going to be dependent on what Donald Trump does with respect to his actions. But there's an interesting thing about a growing dissatisfaction with Democrats in California that I think is worth noting. Remember, by the way, we have elections in New Jersey and we have elections in Virginia. Virginia is a bellwether state. It could go either way. Jersey is considered solidly blue. However, Phil Murphy is not very popular. And I also think that what's happening with New York with congestion pricing is also not very popular. And if it doesn't appear as if the Democrats are doing anything to mitigate that very unpopular decision by New York, they could take it out on Democrats in the state of New Jersey, and the governorship could flip to Republicans. Now, that's, I think, going to depend a lot on these cuts and what Donald Trump does, and whether it's really a crazy time, as I suspect it might be. But it is worth keeping an eye on. And this other story, which I think is very interesting. And this is from Newsweek. And it says Californians turn on the Democratic Party. This is again yesterday. And it says that if the Democratic Party loses ground in California, could reshape this. Actually, let me go up to the top. I'm going to start from the beginning here. Once a stronghold of Democratic dominance, California is witnessing a growing wave of discontent among its residents, signaling a potential political shift. Newsweek has contacted the California Democratic Party for comment via this email. And it goes on to say, California has historically been firmly blue, voting Democratic in every presidential election since 1988. But polls indicate the tide could be turning on the Democrats in the Golden State. According to a new polling by Capital Weekly published on February 6, when asked, do you think the Democratic Party has shown an ability to present an effective case against the Trump administration, only 11% said yes, with 79% of voters saying that the Democratic Party has not shown this ability. Among Democrats, the number didn't improve much, with 19% expressing confidence in their party and 69% saying no. The poll surveyed 1,198 voters in California. Voters were also asked to give one word to describe the Democratic Party. The responses were bleak. The most important words voters chose were lost, ineffective, and weak. Other words included toothless, ineffectual, and floundering. Some voters were more positive, describing the party as determined, optimistic, and caring. Now, this wouldn't mean much to me. It could be an outlier poll, except people who have watched his channel may know that I did a whole video on similar polling, and the data came up just about as accurate. The brand of the Democratic Party is weakness. If you looked at one of those word clouds, weak would come out as the biggest word in the cloud. And it's obvious to me, and it seems clear to me, that this is the real reason why Kamala Harris lost, is that the brand, the California brand, is poor right now. It's really suffering. And I suspect part of the reason why this is so bad right now is because the activists within the party were targeted in the midterms last time. People like Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, as I've said before in my previous video, they are the activists. Those are the squad. They're the activist wings. They're the ones who get loud and get in your face. And unfortunately, the party is still being run by a bunch of old folks, old fogies who are there to negotiate, write sternly worded letters, go on TV and talk about how bad things are and that there's not much they can do, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas you see Republicans, when they're in the minority, they're able to put the screws to the Democratic Party, most notably with the debt ceiling. It's going to be very interesting to see what the budget and the debt ceiling looks like and what Democrats are able to get through negotiation. So the Democrats' brand, as has the Republican brand, really has fallen off a cliff. Finally, I want to do another piece on what I talked about in previous videos, and that is the consent decree. Why do we have consent decrees? Why do they exist with the Justice Department? They exist because some story makes it into the news. It bursts through, and it's so egregious that it captures the nation. George Floyd's killing, Mike Brown's killing, they became such a touch point in America that the Justice Department, the civil rights version of the Justice Department, immediately begins to investigate this, particularly when it's a black person and its police or law enforcement kills them in an egregious way. Breonna Taylor was another one. And what they'll usually find is a pattern and practice of exploitation and racism that is being perpetrated by the police department, and they will go into instead of engaging in some kind of a lawsuit or whatever, they'll try and get a consent decree where they'll get the the mayor, the city mayor, the local law enforcement or whatever to begin to change its practices so that they can become compliant with a more humane treatment of people of color, particularly when they see huge violations like they did in Ferguson of the black community, and it's usually a black community and mostly law enforcement and the political power are white. So immediately what happens when you get a right winger, particularly with respect to Donald Trump last time, is immediately the first thing they do, the attorney general does, is try to get rid of the consent decrees, right? They don't want anybody, the Justice Department, policing the police department, right? They want them, if there's egregious stuff, for them to continue. And that happened under Jeff Sessions, and that is happening right now with the new DOJ with Trump 2.0. And all those black conservatives who talk about Donald Trump as a racist, they really need to recognize this pattern. But there is another case here that we can add to the list of why you need consent decrees and abuse, that once the DOJ or anyone goes looking to find out what is going on in this community with the community and law enforcement, you're going to get people saying, listen, they weren't the only one. You know, I've been targeted like this. And people begin to talk and to speak out. That's why you have a civil rights division of the Justice Department, which has now been neutered under Trump. So this is from CBS News, and this is regarding Sandra Massey. Now, Sonia Massey, I don't know if people remember, but Sonia Massey was shot and killed by a police officer in her home. And on Tuesday, officials approved a $10 million settlement for the family of Sonia Massey, who was shot and killed in her kitchen by a sheriff's deputy in July after Massey called about a possible prowler outside of her home. It's the largest ever paid by the county. In the wake of Massey's killing in Illinois, members of the community were outraged. The sheriff at the time of Massey's killing resigned, and Sheriff Paula Crouch took the position in September. I will do my best to hold my employees accountable and to make sure they are following not only our policies and procedures, but the laws that are in place as well. After Massey's killing, a CBS News investigation found dozens of civil rights complaints against the Sangamon County Sheriff's Office in Illinois going back 20 years. After the past 6 months, the investigation reveals years of civil rights complaints. Let me see if I can get rid of this. Over the past 6 months, CBS News obtained surveillance, body and dash cam videos, crime scene photos, law enforcement documents, and court records relating to more than 50 civil rights complaints filed by families in Sangamon County over the last 20 years. The complaints allege allegations of false arrest, excessive force, and death. During the investigation, CBS News interviewed more than a dozen people who allege police misconduct in the county. The allegations involve multiple deputies and corrections officers, not just the ones mentioned in the story. When Billy Greer saw the video of Sandra Massey, her reaction was that she thought it could have happened to her. In 2022, Greer got a knock on her door by a different Sangamon County Sheriff's deputy than the one that shot Massey. When she declined to accept the court paperwork for a relative, she said the longtime deputy followed her to an elderly neighbor's home where she was delivering food and arrested her. I thought, oh, he could easily shoot me. I was terrified. 11 years before Greer was arrested for no reason, the same deputy pulled over Clifton Flagg and his girlfriend, Tamara Scooby, who was blasted by a taser twice. Scooby said that she still has a scar from where the taser hit her the first time. She filed a federal lawsuit over the incident. She said the judge in her case determined unlawful use of force was used, but said that the sheriff's office did nothing to hold the deputy accountable. The deputy involved in the incident did not respond to multiple requests for comment from CBS News. The county settled the lawsuit with Scooby without admitting liability. Greer and dozens of others sued Sangamon County. In every case, the sheriff's office and the officers involved denied any wrongdoing, even in cases where the county settled. Quote, there are no repercussions for what these officers are out there doing. I don't care if somebody's breaking into my house. I would never call the police to come protect me, Scooby has said. So this is why you need consent decrees. This is why the DOJ does what the DOJ does. It is about taming a police department that will just absorb those fines. Will just take instead of doing anything and making any changes or firing any of their sheriffs, they just decide they'll pay whatever legal fine that the judge deems appropriate, and they walk away. They just absorb the cost of doing business, and the abuses continue. And that's why the consent decrees are so important. That's why what Donald Trump has done in his Justice Department in getting rid of consent decrees and trying to go back from them is so important and so dangerous. And it is why a lot of people believe he's a racist, including me. Thank you for joining me on this one, and you'll see me on the next one. Take care, everyone. Hey there, fantastic viewers. Eric Darnley Small here, and I hope you're loving today's episode of What You Missed. You've reached the end of today's show, but don't worry, there's more show coming up. If you're watching this on YouTube, please click the bell so that you'll be notified when more content is available. You can also help the channel by clicking the like and subscribe buttons. It helps the YouTube algorithm find new viewers so that I can keep bringing you all this incredible content you enjoy. But wait, there are more ways to support the show. You can make a contribution through the show's PayPal, which goes a long way in helping produce even better content for you. And consider becoming a part of our growing community by joining our Mastodon site at mastodon.vtip.me/@whatyoumissed for more engaging discussions and exclusive updates. And here's something you won't want to miss. Mark your calendars for our live show streaming on YouTube and stream.vtip.me Monday mornings, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Your support means the world to me, and together we're making What You Missed the best it can be. Thanks for being a part of my journey.